Hello students, I welcome you to my channel Abhikalitra AKCCS classes. This is a new course, Computer Organization and Architecture, where I will include the topics that are covered in most undergraduate syllabus of various universities in my video lectures. So follow this course and go through each of my video lectures, and I'm sure it will help you understand this subject better. Today the topic that we are interested in is basic structure of computers. So before we begin, I would request all of you to please subscribe, like and share my channel Abhikalitra AKCCS classes. The contents that we are interested today in are block diagram of a digital computer, types of computer architecture, functional view of computer, operational concept and bus structure, multiprocessor and multi-computer. So before we begin, this particular term computer organization or the computer architecture, which one to use, or is there any special difference between these two terms? So starting with computer organization, it is basically concerned with the way the hardware components operate and the way they are connected together to form the computer system. That means all the hardware details. That means if two different components wants to communicate with each other, what are the different ways that these two hardwares are actually communicating, or what is the actual technique that these two hardware components are actually communicating with each other is the main detail, or is the core detail, or the complex part of computer organization. Or we can say how the control signals are actually generated from the control unit, or the different kind of peripheral devices that we actually connect to our device or to our computer, how they are being controlled, how they are managed, how the control signals are sent to those peripheral devices, who are actually controlling them. These all questions, or all this management, it comes under the computer organization part. Now if we come to computer architecture, then it is concerned with the structure and behavior of the computer as seen by the user. It is concerned with the specifications of various functional modules such as processors and memories and structuring them together. So architectural attributes basically includes what are the different kinds of instruction set that we can actually form. For now, it may be really difficult for you to understand that what is the instruction set, but don't worry, we will come to this part separately. But for the time being, just assume that if you just want to interact to a certain person, so it should have a certain language to follow. If you are Bengali, or if you speak Tamil, then you should actually communicate to that person in that language so that that particular person can understand. So it has got a specific kind of set of alphabets that you're going to use together in order to pronounce a certain word. So this is what an instruction set is. That means in order to communicate with a certain kind of component, you have to follow the kind of instruction set that is basically assigned to that particular component. Or what are the different sections that are present inside that particular instruction set, that has to be followed separately. What are the different data types that we can actually put to that instruction set, or what are the different kind of techniques we are using for the addressing memory, whether we are actually addressing memory using direct addressing or we are accessing memory using indirect addressing. These two terms may seem to be really new to you. Obviously you don't have to worry about it, we are going to come separately in the coming video lectures, but for the time being, just understand that the addressing memory, or the different techniques for addressing memory, consist of accessing a particular data from the memory, right? So how you are going to access that data from the memory, that has also got different types of techniques. So to access a certain data from a particular memory location also contains different kind of techniques, and that particular or these attributes actually come under the part of computer architecture. Now in computer organization, say there's a term that is being used is in computer organization, see, a term is used, memory technology, right? So what are this memory technology? That means whether your memory is using EEPROM, whether your memory is using EEPROM, or it is using ROM, or it is a RAM, what it is, such kind of technological details comes under the part of computer organization. So if I take an example like, so if I want to add two numbers, right? So in order to add two numbers, if I know how to actually fetch these two numbers from memory, then I can pass the instruction to the instruction set and then instruct them to fetch me those two numbers. Now this particular part comes under the computer architecture form, but now the way those numbers are actually fetched from the memory is the part for computer organization. So what are the different techniques that are being actually used in order to fetch those two numbers? What is the role of control unit in here to fetch these two numbers from the memory and then adding up these two numbers? So this particular part comes under the part of computer organization, right? I hope I have cleared the difference between computer organization and computer architecture. Now we come to computer design. So what is a computer design? It is basically concerned with the determination of what hardware to use and how to connect those parts together, right? So if I know what are the hardware that I have to use in order to build a particular system, then the designer responsibility is to develop that particular system for me by connecting those hardware components together. So this is a part of computer design. In our syllabus, we will be covering some computer design parts, but the hardcore part of computer design will not be covered in our syllabus, or it is actually not a part of syllabus in many undergraduate systems under various universities, right? So now we'll move on to the next slide. So now we'll be covering a basic digital computer. So for that, we will be referring a diagram. So this is the diagram that I will be referring. So this is a random access memory, this is a central processing unit, this is input and output processor, these are some output devices, and these are some input devices, right? So the hardware basically consists of three major parts. What are the three major parts? RAM, CPU and IOP, which is input output processor. So the CPU basically contains arithmetic and logic unit for manipulating data, a number of registers for storing data, and control circuits for fetching and executing instructions. The part of the CPU which is responsible for doing this arithmetic and logic unit can also be termed as ALU, right? And there are different kind of registers that are used inside the CPU in order to store the intermediate results. You must be familiar with the term registers, but if you are not, then registers can be considered as if you have placed adjacent different flip-flops. What are flip-flops? Flip-flops are used to store a single bit. So if you need to store a large number of bits, so if I can actually form a circuit which will actually store 8 bits at a time by connecting 8 adjacent flip-flops together, then that particular formation or that particular block diagram or that particular circuit diagram can be termed as a register. That means register is basically a collection of different flip-flops, right? So there are basically different flip-flops that are inside a particular registers, and each flip-flop is basically responsible for storing a bit, right? So, and there are control circuits obviously for fetching and executing instructions. So these control circuits are basically coming out from the control unit, right? So the next part comes is memory. So the memory over here, see, it is written as random access memory. Why it is called random? Because the CPU can access any location in memory at random to retrieve any data in a very fixed interval of time, right? So random access memory can be also of different types that we will be covering in our upcoming video lectures, but for the time being we are only concerned with the word random access memory and why it is so called, right? So the next part that we are interested is in input output processor. The input output processor basically is used for communicating with the different peripheral devices that are connected with the computer. The peripheral devices can be input devices like keyboard, like mouse, and there are some output devices like printers. This can be a display monitor, right? So all these input and output devices are controlled by a separate processor which is known by input output processor, right? This input output processor is basically responsible of handling all the different kind of problems or management of input and output devices, right? So now we'll move on to the next slide. Now, what are the different types of computer architecture? There are basically two different types of computer architecture. One is von Neumann architecture and another one is Harvard architecture, right? So first we will be discussing about von Neumann architecture. So the von Neumann architecture is basically a general framework for computers hardware, programming and data that it should actually follow. So it is basically describing a general framework that a computer's hardware, its programming and data should actually follow. So von Neumann architecture actually goes with the concept of stored program, right? It's a stored program. What is actually a stored program concept? It says that both instruction and data are stored in the same memory area of the computer, and the execution is done in a sequential manner, right? So what it is actually trying to say is that we are storing both the instruction and the data in a single memory area. So if I say that this is a memory location and there are different, this is a memory module, sorry, and there are different memory locations, right? So what I'm trying to say in von Neumann architecture is that the instruction and the data both are stored in the same memory module, right? So if the instruction and data both are stored in the same memory module, then such a kind of concept is known as stored program concept, right? And again, in a separate memory location, another instruction and another data is stored, right? So what is the main constant of von Neumann? The main constant is the speed limit. Why? Because the computer cannot go to the next instruction until the current instruction execution is complete. That means if the processor is actually processing this particular memory location or this particular instruction, then it cannot move to the next instruction until and unless this instruction is complete. Now you may be wondering that why there should be a need of going to the next instruction when the current instruction is not yet complete. There may be some portion of your program or there may be some portion of your instruction which actually deals with input-output operation, right? With input or output operation. Now if there are some input or output operation, then this particular part is completely dependent upon the user. Suppose you have written a particular program to add two numbers. Now you want the user to enter the two different numbers in order to add. So the user can enter these two numbers right now, or the user can enter these two numbers later also. So this later can be 5 minutes later, it can be 10 minutes later, it can be after 1 year, it can be after 10 years, or whatever it is, right? So the processor cannot wait for this particular instruction to get complete and then it will move to the next instruction, right? So in order to, so if there is some kind of provision where if the instruction that we are actually currently now executing is an input output instruction, then the processor should be able to leave this particular current instruction and move on to the next instruction. And when the input will be supplied by the user, the processor will again return back to this particular instruction and do the remaining execution work. So this is what it is required. But in von Neumann architecture, it says even if you are waiting for an input and output task, you cannot leave the present instruction and move to the next instruction. So this actually increases the waiting time of this next instruction and the data which is actually waiting for getting executed. This is the main disadvantage of von Neumann architecture, right? The structure of a computer system consists of the following components. So what are the different structure, or what is the basic structure of a computer system that von Neumann actually follows? The CPU performs the computer's computational logical functions. The CPU over here means the arithmetic logic unit, which is actually responsible for computing the computer's computational logical functions, right? So the next is memory, or the computer's main memory, such as RAM. So it will be using RAM as the memory to store the instruction and data, right, for execution. Control unit that directs other components of the computer to perform certain actions, such as directing the fetching of data or instructions from memory. So control unit is there to actually generate some kind of control signals in order to fetch or to store some instruction or data into the memory, right? There are some man-machine interfaces. Man-machine interfaces means some input or output devices which are required for communication with the computer, right? If you want to communicate with the computer, like if you want to supply or if you want to input two numbers that you want to add, so here actually you are communicating with the computer using a keyboard, and the result is displayed back to the monitor. So the computer is now communicating with you with the help of this particular monitor, right? So examples of von Neumann architecture is the desktop personal computer. So now we move on to the next part, which is hardware architecture. Hardware architecture basically uses separate storage and signal pathways for their instruction and data. So in von Neumann architecture, we were actually using a single memory to store both instruction and data. But in hardware architecture, we will be using two different memory modules, where a single memory module will be used for storing only the instruction, and a separate memory module will be used for storing the data part, right? So the term originated from Harvard Mark I relay-based computer, which stores instruction on a punch tape and data in relay latches. What are latches? You are familiar with the term latches, right? The CPU can read both an instruction and data from memory at the same time, leading to double the memory bandwidth, right? So that means what? The simultaneous operation of both instruction reading and data reading from the memory can be done. So obviously, if you are doing the two tasks parallelly at the same time, you will be requiring more bandwidth, or you will be requiring more space, or you will be requiring more number of parallel wires in order to carry a single bit through each wire. So the bandwidth requirement is more in case of a hardware architecture. So examples of hardware architectures are microcontroller based computer system and digital signal processor based computer systems. All these particular systems will be somewhat discussed in your syllabus, or whatever architecture syllabus or video lectures that will be uploaded. So now we come to the functional view of computer. So for this, we refer to this particular diagram. Say this diagram consists of some data movement apparatus, control mechanism, data storage facility, data processing facility, and over here it's operating environment, right? What are all these things? The operation of each individual component as part of the structure. So this is basically the operational structural diagram, which actually allows you to understand that how the data is actually being communicated through various components, right? So the figure actually depicts the basic functions that a computer can perform, which includes data processing, the data processing capability, the data storage capability, the data movement. These lines actually indicate the data movements that are basically happening through different modules, right? And the control, who are actually controlling this particular mechanism. Say if someone wants to communicate with the data movement apparatus, and this part is also trying to communicate with data movement apparatus at the same time, then someone has to do it first. So who is actually controlling all these things? So this control mechanism is actually controlling all these different modules, right? So the computer must be able to process data. So when we actually talk about processing data, what does actually mean, or what does the process data actually mean? Suppose we are trying to enter some alphabets or some alphanumeric characters through the keyboard. So when you are entering, say, A capital, or when you are entering some numbers like 1 or say 7, etc. So in all these cases, whatever you are entering, these numbers are not the numbers that these numbers are not in the form that the computer is actually comfortable with. The numbers or the data, whatever that you are actually supplying through the keyboard, are actually processed further. These alphabets or this numeric number or these numbers are converted to its equivalent ASCII value, and the ASCII value is then converted to a binary stream. The binary stream is then converted to some voltage signals which are actually being stored into the memory locations. So this is basically what we actually want to mean by the term processing of data, right? So processing of data facility has to be there. So this is a separate kind of module that is being done over here, right? So the next part is the storage part. The storage part basically consists of various kind of storage. The storage part can consist of temporary storage. The storage part can consist of large storage or some permanent storage. The short-term storage may be called as registers, that we have already discussed in a previous slide, where we actually are interested in storing some intermediate results in a particular register. So if you are interested in storing some small information or some few information, then we will be using registers, and or we will be using or if the processor is interested in taking up some data from a certain memory, then that memory is basically random access memory, right? Because the CPU can actually access any location at random. So these are basically, you can term these kind of memory as short-term data storage function. There are some storage functions which are long-term data storage functions, which are there in the computer's memory for a long period, right? So these can be some secondary storage, some secondary hard disk, and you can store some data into that secondary storage for a long period of time, as long and whenever you require that particular data, you can fetch anytime you want, right? But in case of a random access memory, since we know in most of the cases random access memory are basically a kind of volatile storage, so as long as the power of the computer is there, the data that is stored in the computer's RAM is basically there. But once the power is turned off, on the data that or the information that is stored in RAM will be lost. So this is what the difference between a short-term data storage function and a long-term data storage function, right? So these are the different kind of modules that we were talking about, right? So now comes the ability to move the data. So if we actually want the data to move from one module to different module, these are modules, but these modules are basically comprising of many different computers components which are actually responsible in taking up the module space, right? If I say that I'm talking about data processing facility, and in the data processing facility I'm having a kind of a hardware component who is actually converting the keys that are being pressed from the keyboard into its equivalent ASCII values. So for that there should be some movement of data, right? Whatever data that I'm supplying through the keyboard should be able to move to this particular module, right? So in order to move, the computer control mechanism should have some kind of provision so that the data that you are actually supplying through the keyboard should be able to move to the data processing facility, right? So for that, each and individual component or each and individual hardware component has a specific kind of address. These addresses are sometimes known as port addresses. So whatever instruction that you are typing through the keyboard, that keyboard is also a peripheral device, input peripheral device, and that input peripheral device is also having a kind of port number, which you can consider it to be as a source port number, because we are entering through the keyboard, and the destination port number will be that part of the hardware component who is responsible in converting this particular keys into its corresponding ASCII values, right? So when the data is actually received from keyboard, right, so it is an input output device. So there can be situations when data can also be received from a memory. There can be situations when the data is also received from a register. So if you are receiving data from input output device, like input output device means from keyboard or mouse, or through some input device which is connected to your computer, then the input output processor will be responsible in receiving those inputs from the peripheral devices. There are different kind of inputs which are coming through remote devices, right? So these remote devices can be, you can consider that you are requesting for a website, or you're requesting for a page, right, from the Google's website, right? And that page is coming from a very remote server into your device or into your computer. That means the source address is basically that port address of that remote server from which this particular page is actually coming, and the destination port address is the RJ45 cable that is connected to my computer's port, is the port address that I want to receive into my computer. These are some kind of long distances data communications, and there are some short distances data communications which are there in your, and there are some short distance data communication which actually includes your keyboard, your mouse, your barcode scanner, or whatever input devices that you can actually reach very quickly, right? So this is what a long distance communication and a short distance communication is. So now we come to the control mechanism. So the control mechanism basically is a kind of control unit which is actually generating some kind of control signals which is actually enabling or disabling a certain device, right? So if I want to access a certain device, this control mechanism is basically generating a kind of control signals which is actually enabling or disabling a certain device so that we can have a response from that particular hardware component, right? Now we'll come to the operational concept. So what is this operational concept? So before actually we go into depth of computer organization and architecture, we want to actually give the details of working principle of a computer. We will analyze how computers work with the help of a small hypothetical computer, right? So we do not consider about the input and output unit. We will consider only CPU and the memory module. And we are assuming that somehow we have stored the program and data into memory. We are not going into the depth of how they are being actually stored. We actually are assuming that they are being stored somehow into the memory, and we will see how CPU can perform the job depending on the program stored in main memory. So my assumption is that students should understand common terms like program, CPU, memory, etc. without knowing the exact details, right? We will be coming to exact details, in-depth details in our coming video lectures, but when you are actually introducing computer organization or you are introducing the operational concept of the working of a computer, then it should not be covered in very depth because there are some terms that you may not actually be familiar with, right? So we will move on, right? So the first part is central processing unit. Basically consists of ALU. So what does a ALU does? ALU actually performs some kind of arithmetic operations and some logical operations. To be very specific, the arithmetic operation that actually ALU performs is the addition only. So the subtraction is actually achieved using 2's complement addition, right? The division is a repetitive subtraction. Again, it can be achieved using addition, 2's complement addition. The multiplication is repetitive addition, also that can be achieved using addition. So the only arithmetic operation that is there in ALU is addition, and the remaining are some logical operations. There are many different logical operations, there are many different shift operations that a ALU can perform. So we will be taking a very small example about that. So we will consider this particular table. Here you see there are two different categories. The first category is arithmetic operations and the second category is logical operations. Under arithmetic operations, I am considering 4 different arithmetic operations: addition, multiplication, subtraction, division. And I am considering 4 different logical operations: NAND, NOR, AND and OR, right? So in total there are how many different operations? 4 plus 4, 8. So if you need to actually assign a unique binary value to each and individual operations that the ALU is actually performing, how many bits you need? So there are 8 different kind of operations. So obviously we will be requiring only 3 bits to assign a unique binary value to each and every operations that our ALU is going to perform. So we have randomly allotted the binary values to each and every logical and arithmetic operations. We have assumed 000 for addition, 001 for multiplication, 010 for subtraction, 011 for division, 100 for NAND, 101 for NOR, 110 for AND and 11 for or. This is complete a random assumption, or it's a complete random allocation. This you don't have to remember, or there is no specific algorithm that we are actually following in actually allocating all these numbers or allocating all these binary digits to each and individual operations, right? So the main function of CU, which is control unit, is to generate signal when a certain task is required to perform. This is what the main function of CU is. So the instruction decoder in CPU decodes the information in such a way that computer can perform the desired task. So what is this instruction decoder? The simple model for the decoder may be considered that there is a 3 input lines to the decoder, and correspondingly it generates 8 output lines. Why 8 output lines? Because we have 8 different operations, right? And if I consider that I have a separate circuit for each and individual operations, then for each operation I need to enable that particular circuit in order to perform that particular task. And this particular decoder, which is actually having 8 different output lines, each of the line or each of the output line is responsibly enabling or disabling a certain circuit for a particular operation to perform, right? So depending upon the input combination that you are providing to the decoder, only one of the output signals will be generated, and it is used to indicate the corresponding operation of ALU. That is how it is being done, right? So if I take this with the help of an example, so if I take a pen, so I'm considering that there is a separate hardware unit which is adding up, right? My handwriting through this white screen is a bit difficult maybe for you to understand, but still I'm trying, because I'm writing this with the help of a mouse, and it is very difficult to actually write anything with the help of a mouse, right? So this is just an initiative to make you understand more clearly what I'm trying to say. So this is the addition component, or a circuit for adding. This is a circuit for subtracting. This is a circuit for multiplying, and this is a circuit for division. And suppose I have only these 4 different operations, so I'll be requiring only 2x4 decoder, right? This is a 2x4 decoder. Why? Because 4 lines will be coming out from this particular decoder, and each of the output line will be actually enabling a certain circuit or a component, right? And whatever value that you are going to supply over here, if I consider this to be as A and this to be as B, then whatever input you are supplying to A and B will actually depend which of the hardware components or which of the circuit components you are actually enabling or you are trying to enable. So if I supply, say, 0 0, then 1 will be coming out. If I consider to be as this 0, this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. So a 1 will be coming out from this 0th line, and all the remaining lines will be producing 0, right? So all the remaining circuits will be deactivated, and only the addition circuit will be activated. So if you want to add 2 numbers to so the control unit will be generating 0 0 to this particular input decoder, so that the addition operation is performed correctly or without any hindrance, right? So this is the way we are actually want to or this is what we actually call a instruction decoder. This is a instruction decoder. So now coming back to this part, so this is what an instruction decoder does. Now in our model we assume that we have 3 storage units. Since we are actually considering a very hypothetical computer, so whatever assumptions that we are assuming for our computer is actually an instance for you people to make understand how the operation is done inside a computer. So we are actually assuming that there are 3 storage units in CPU, 2 for storing the operand and 1 for storing the result. So obviously you are storing some short-term results, and they have to be registers. So these two registers are required for storing the 2 different operands that you want to perform the operation between these 2 operands. And when you perform the operation and you want to store the result somewhere, you have to store it in the result register, right? So if I assume that you are adding up 3 numbers, then what the ALU will do is that it will add two numbers and store the result in the result register, and it will go on fetching the last number and add that particular number with the result register, and again storing the result back into the result register. So in this way it is actually performing, or it actually performs the different kind of operations, right? So now we'll be moving to our next part, which is the memory part. So obviously when you are dealing with some operands, you have to store those operands somewhere, right? So for that we have some storage space, right? So for storage space we can have main memory, the RAM, random access memory, some registers, there can be cache memory, there can be secondary memory, depending upon the kind of complexity of the architecture that it includes, right? So to access the data from memory, we need two special registers. One is memory data register, which is popularly known by the term MDR, and the second one is memory address register. So what are these two registers, right? So memory address register is the CPU register that either stores the memory address from which data will be fetched to the CPU, or the address to which data will be sent and stored, right? So memory address register is the one from where the main operand or the main data has to be fetched, and when the data is fetched from the memory, it is placed in a register known by the term memory data register. This is also known by the term memory buffer register, MBR or MDR, right? So memory data register, or it may be a memory buffer register. So data and program is stored in main memory. Obviously this, while executing a program, CPU brings instruction and data from main memory, performs the tasks as per the instruction fetched from the memory. After completion of operations, CPU stores the result back into the memory. So this part I have already discussed in my previous slide. So the main memory is the main storage unit. There are several locations for storing information in the main memory module. So how will you actually specify the memory module, or how you will actually write a memory module, right? You are going to draw a memory, but how you are going to specify a memory module, right? To specify a memory module, or to specify the capacity of a memory module, we will be using the number of memory location and the information stored in each location. So in our example, if I consider that we have a memory module of capacity 16 cross 4, which indicates that 16 are the different memory locations present in the memory module, and each location is capable of storing 4 bits at a time. So if I say that this particular module is not 16 cross 4, it is 16 cross 8, then there are 16 different locations, and each location can actually store a byte, because 8 bits means 1 byte. So in other ways we can also say that it is a 16, or in other ways we can also say that it is a 16 byte of memory, right? In order to work with memory, we need two different operations. What are these two different operations? One is read. This operation is to retrieve the data from memory and bring it to the CPU register. That means you are accessing a particular memory location and trying to bring the data from the memory to a certain CPU register. This process is known as a read operation. What is the write operation? That means you are actually doing the reverse work, right? That means you are trying to store the content of a CPU register into a memory location. That means you are writing in a memory location from a CPU register. So it's a write operation. So for this, we actually have to should have a kind of provision to distinguish between a read signal and a write signal. For that, we are actually using a read write signal, R by W, right? So if I say that if the R by W signal is equal to 0, that means we actually want to perform a read operation. So the control unit will now understand that if R by W signal line is 0, that means we are actually interested in performing a read operation. But if the R by W signal line is 1, then we actually want to perform a write operation. So in this way, we are using a kind of signal which is actually distinguishing between the two different operations, read and write. So in order to transfer the data from the CPU, so whatever be the operation, read or write, that means there has to be a kind of transferring of data from memory to a CPU register or from a CPU register to memory. So for that we actually need a connection, and that particular connection is termed as a data bus, because we are actually either storing a data in a memory or in the memory, or we are actually interested in fetching a particular data from memory to a CPU register. And when a data is being fetched or stored in a particular memory location or a CPU register, then that particular connection is termed as a data bus, because data is flowing through that particular connection. So the size of the data bus obviously will indicate how many bits we can transfer at a time. Generally what it happens is that the size of the data bus is mainly the data storage capacity of each location of a memory module. That means in the previous slide I have told that I've considered a memory of 16 cross 4. That means if there are 16 different locations and 4 bits can be stored in each location at a time. So if I consider a data bus of 4 bits, right? So I have considered a data bus of 4 bits because the size of the data bus is 4 bits, because so the data bus should actually be specified by the data storage capacity of each location of the memory module. So if the memory module is 16 cross 8, then we will be expecting a data bus size of 8 bits. So if the size is 32 cross 16, then we'll be expecting a data bus of size 16, right? So it is all dependent upon the dimension of the memory module, right? So now we have to resolve the issues of how to specify a memory location where we want to store our data, or we want to retrieve the data out of a particular memory location. So how we are actually going to specify a particular memory location, or how we are going to access a particular memory location by specifying something to the computer. How we are going to do that? So this can be done with the help of a memory address. So that means each and every location of the memory module should have a certain memory address, and each location of the memory address can be specified with the help of a binary address, right? So if there are say 16 different locations in my memory module, so I will be requiring only 4 bits to uniquely number each and every location of a 16 cross 4 memory location, right? So if there are say 4 different memory location, if I consider a memory module where there are 4 different locations, so I will be requiring only 2 bits. The first location will be 00, the second location will be 01, the third location will be 10, and the fourth location will be 11. So in the same way we can assign binary addresses to any memory module of any kind of any dimension, right? So to distinguish 16 location, we need 4 signal lines. Because why 4 signal lines? Because 2 to the power 4 is equal to 16. So if I need to address 16 different locations, I need 4 lines. So I need 4 lines means whenever I'm trying to specify an address, so I need a separate connection in order to specify an address. To retrieve or to store a data, we required a separate connection, and we have named that particular connection as data bus. But when we are actually trying to now store, or we are now actually trying to access a particular memory location using its binary address, so we now require a separate connection, and that separate connection is now termed as address bus. This is address bus, right? So this address bus is basically what us to identify a certain memory location, right? So the address bus size will depend again upon the memory module dimension. So in our case, since we are having 16 cross 4 memory module, so there are 16 locations, so we require only 4 bits in order to identify each and every location of a memory, each and every location of our memory module. So obviously if I need just 4 bits to identify each location of the memory module, so the size of the address bus should also be 4. So for this we use only 2 signal values, 0 and 1. Obviously we are dealing with binary values, so obviously we will be using 0 and 1. So we have considered a memory module of 16 cross 4 size. So obviously, since there are 16 locations, we will be requiring address bus size of 4-bit, and the data bus size will be of 4-bit, because there are 4 bits that can be stored in each location of a 16 cross 4 memory module, right? So now what if the contents of the address bus is 0111? So what we have done is that we have placed 011 in the address bus. What is 011? This is 7. That means we actually want to access the 7th location of the memory module, and the contents of the data bus is 1010. That means we are actually want to store a particular content in a certain memory location. In our example, that location is 7. So, and if the read write control signal, that means how will the control unit know whether we are actually trying to perform a read operation or write operation? So if the read write control signal is equal to 1, which actually means a write operation, in our previous slides we have discussed that. So if it is a write operation, then obviously 1010 will be placed in 011 location, right? So for this, if I say the example that we have considered previously in the whiteboard on a white screen, like we have actually taken 4 different circuit components, right? And each component is activated or deactivated through the output lines of a certain decoder. Over here we are also doing the same process. We are actually considering a 4x16 decoder, and each line of the decoder which is coming out from a 4x16 decoder is actually enabling or disabling a certain location. This certain location is basically what? It is a kind of combination of many different flip-flops, right? So all these flip-flops are either enabled or disabled at the same time, right? So if all the flip-flops of a certain location are enabled or disabled at a particular time, then we are successful in enabling or disabling a certain memory location, right? So for this, I will be again referring to the white screen, and considering that I have a memory module of 16 different locations, right? Say this is 0, this is 1, and this is 2, and dot dot, and this is say 15, right? And there is a kind of a decoder. The size of the decoder obviously is 4x16, and there are 4 input lines to the decoder, and there are 16 lines coming out from the decoder, right? If I consider this to be a 0, this is 1, this is 2, and this is 15, right? So these are the different output lines which are coming. So if I say that I am supplying 0 0 0 0, right? All these are zeros. So if all these are zeros, then obviously we'll have a 1 in this 0th output line, and all the remaining output lines will be producing a 0 output. So if I say that this 0th line is connected to the 0th location, and it is enabling the clock of all the flip-flops which are basically adjacent to each other, which are arranged in an adjacent manner in this location. So there are, as if there are 4 flip-flops, right? These are individual, they are flip-flops. I'm writing FF, right? So all the clocks that are being used for all the flip-flops are enabled when we are actually supplying 0000, and this 1 will actually enable the clock of all the flip-flops of this particular location, enabling the entire location of this memory module. So obviously then we can easily store the data or retrieve the data from this particular memory location. If I have supplied, say if I have supplied 1 1 1 1, then this 15th location will have a 1, and all the different remaining output location will be 0, and this 1 will actually enable the 4 different flip-flops which are actually having, which are connected or which are adjacently connected over here, will actually enable this particular output line, will actually enable the clock of all the 4 flip-flops, and this particular location will get activated. So Obviously, this is a kind of technique which is actually being followed in actually enabling a certain location or disabling other locations or different locations, right? So coming back to the slide, so if I take another example, like if the content of the address bus is 1010, so we have placed the address bus with the value of 1010, which is 10, and the read write signal line is 0. That means we want to read, right? So we want to read from the memory location 10, and then the contents of the location 1010 will be placed in the data bus. So whatever content which is there in 1010 location will now be placed in the data bus, and to place that particular data bits in a memory buffer register or memory data register, right? So now we come to the next topic of multiprocessor and multi-computer. So what is multiprocessor? A multiprocessor is a kind of a memory system that is addressable by each processor, right? The memory system consists of one or more memory modules whose address space is shared by all the processors. That means there are multiple processors, right? Either these processors will be having their own individual resources, or all the processors will be sharing some common resources, right? So depending upon the organization of the memory system, the multiprocessor systems can be further divided into two groups. The first one is tightly coupled and the next one is loosely coupled. So what are tightly coupled? In tightly coupled system, the different processors or the multiprocessor actually share the different memory or different resources. If I consider that resource is memory, then a central memory system is placed somewhere, and all the different processors which are actually performing some parallel operations will actually fetch or will actually access this particular common memory system for storing or retrieving data, right? So the main disadvantage of this particular tightly coupled multiprocessor system is the sharing, the concept of sharing. Because if I say the memory system or the memory system that I'm having in my tightly coupled system is limited with space, so if I consider that I'm having 4 different processors which are working in parallel, and if I say that after the 2 processors which actually wants to have an access to the memory system is actually storing some data into the memory system, there is actually no more space left. So when 2 processors is actually having an access to the memory system, or when 2 processors is storing some data into the memory system, there leaves no memory system, or there exists no memory locations to store any more data from the 3rd or from the 4th processor. And if it is the case, then the 3rd processor or the 4th processor, if it actually wants to store some data into the memory system, then it has to wait until the memory system is actually freed, or a location of a memory system or a particular block of a memory system is actually freed, so that it can actually store its content into the memory system. So the constraint over here is the operations of the 3rd or the 4th processor which are actually waiting to get the access of the memory is delayed somehow, right? The processing power or the throughput is actually degraded. So the operating time requirement or the operating time that is being required is also getting delayed, right? So in this tightly coupled system, we are actually sharing some kind of resources that are available to us. And what is a loosely coupled multiprocessor? In a loosely coupled multiprocessor, we are actually interested in providing resources to each and individual processor. Here also we are having multiple parallel processors, and each and individual parallel processor is having its own local memory. It is unlike in the tightly coupled system where it was actually sharing a common memory. The common memory was being shared by the different processors. In loosely coupled system, in contrast to that of a loosely coupled system, it is having a separate local memory which is being given to each and individual processor, and the processor over here can have a direct access to its own local memory without waiting for someone else to free its location, and then only that particular processor can actually enter or store some data into the memory. So over here it has got a very good advantage, but on the other side, when you're having separate resources for separate processor, the entire system, the cost of the entire system will also grow, right? So there are some disadvantages and there are some advantages to every kind of system technique that we actually will come across in our video lectures, right? So now when we have discussed multiprocessor, we will now be discussing about multi-computers. So what are multi-computers? The multi-computers can be thought about like there are many different processors or many different kind of terminals which are having what? They're having their own local memory, they're having their own input output port, they're having their own processing power, and each of these terminals can then be termed as a node, or these individual processing unit can be termed as node. These can also be termed as peer, right? This is a kind of peer-to-peer network kind of technique, and there is not a single node, there are many different nodes, and each of the different nodes are having different kind of processing powers, and all the different nodes are basically connected through a particular connection, and this particular connection is an interconnection network. These processors are basically connected through an interconnection network, and they can also communicate through this particular intercommunication network. Now suppose a particular processor requires two operations. The first one is multiplication and another one is division, and the processing that it can perform on its own is addition, but the work that or the task that it has been assigned consists of two operations, multiplication and division. So obviously the processor itself cannot do the work on its own, so it will be actually communicating to those nodes which are actually capable of doing the multiplication operation or which are actually capable of doing a division operation, and those nodes will be assigned the particular task, and after they complete the task, the result is being returned to the mother processor or the source processor. So in this way the communication is actually happening. So over in the peer-to-peer network, we do not actually have a client server kind of network. These are all our peers. Any one peer can be for a particular task, any two peers can be a client and a server, and in the next moment for a different task the same peer can be the same peer which was previously client can become a server, and another peer which was acting like a server now will act as a client. So it all depends upon the task that is being thrown to the particular node and its ability, whether it can actually perform on its own or it's going to take or it is going to take the help of or it's going to take the help of other nodes, right? So in a multi-computer system, a processor only has direct access to its own local memory and not to its remote memories. Obviously, because you are a terminal which is having its own local resources, you cannot have access to other computers' local resources. You can only request that particular node for a certain operation that you cannot perform on your own. So if a processor has to access or modify a piece of data that does not exist in its own local memory, a message passing mechanism is used to achieve this task. Such kind of message passing mechanism is there in depth in operating system, right? There you will be able to study all the different kind of message passing mechanism that are being used for actually passing messages to the remote node or the remote nodes for communication or to access a certain memory location which is a part of a local memory for a remote node, right? So now, what is the difference between a multi-computer and a multiprocessor? The first one is it is a system with two or more multiprocessor is a system with two or more CPUs that is capable of performing multiple tasks, whereas a multi-computer is a system with multiple processors that are attached via an interconnection network to perform a computation task. It is already discussed, right? Next, a multiprocessor system is a single computer that operates with multiple CPUs, whereas a multi-computer system is a cluster of computers that perform as a singular computer. Construction of a multi-computer is easier and cost-effective than a multiprocessor. Obviously, if you are having a uniprocessor system, right? In a multi-computer system, you can have a uniprocessor. You are having a uniprocessor, and if all the peers which are connected to the network are all having uniprocessor, then in order to perform a particular task, the task can be distributed into all the uniprocessor nodes, which are actually capable of performing which are actually having the same processing power as the processing power which is being generated by the source node, right? So if I say that my terminal is capable of performing addition operation and I want to add say 5 bits I want to add two 5-bit numbers, right? And there are total of 5 different nodes in this particular network which are capable of adding two binary bit numbers, right? So obviously then I will be sharing all the bits among the 5 different nodes in the network, so that the operation now becomes like a parallel operation. Although I am not using a multiprocessor, still it resembles like a multiprocessor in the interconnection network, right? So each and individual bit is assigned to a separate node, and each and individual nodes are then actually processing or executing those values parallelly, right? So it gives a resemblance of a multiprocessor system, but although you are not using a multiprocessor system, you are using a uniprocessor system, but it resembles like a multiprocessor system because you are connected in a network, right? So obviously if you are going to invest on a multiprocessor system, it will cost you more, and if you are investing on a uniprocessor system and then you are getting yourself connected to an interconnection network, it is obviously going to cost you less. In a multiprocessor system, program tends to be easier, whereas in multi-computer system, program tends to be more difficult, because in a multi-computer system you need to have the different kind of addresses, right? The remote addresses, your interconnection network should be free from all kind of faults, right? There are many different kind of faults that can happen. It will also depend upon the kind of connection that you are actually using to connect all the different nodes, right? So there are many different constraints there in the interconnection network. So obviously the program tends to be much more easier in a multiprocessor system, whereas obviously in a multi-computer system it tends to be more difficult. So multiprocessor system supports parallel computing, multi-computer supports distributed computing. So the distributed computing obviously it can resemble some kind of parallel computing as well, because I've given you the example. So obviously distributed because you are not performing all the operations in your own terminal. You are actually distributing a particular task to various nodes which are actually in this particular network. So obviously it is a kind of a distributed computing, and a multiprocessor, since all the processors are there in your terminal itself, so it's a kind of parallel computing. Obviously if you look in a different angle to the distributed computing, then it will resemble like a parallel computing, right? So this brings the end of our today's lecture. So thank you, and please do not forget to subscribe, like and share my channel Abhikalitra AKC CS classes, and help us to grow, that we become more motivated in uploading more such video lectures which will help you in understanding the subjects even more easier and in a better way. Thank you.